William Shakespeare, born in 1564 in the town of Stratford in central England. At some point he moves to London, and in the 1590s, when in his late 20s or early 30s, Shakespeare's plays begin to appear. The famous Globe Theatre wasn't built until 1599, so Shakespeare and his players were performing at the theatre at Shoreditch, a couple of miles to the north. The plays were extraordinarily popular and even performed before the Queen, Elizabeth I. But then, during the 1600s, England descended into civil war. The victors, the Roundheads, deposed the monarchy, and the Puritan general, Oliver Cromwell, seized control. Cromwell's Puritan regime considered performing arts decadent. Theatres were forcibly closed and some burned to the ground. But in 1660, after Cromwell's death, the monarchy was restored and Charles II became king. The theatres were reopened and Shakespeare's plays experienced a grand revival. The problem, however, after years of turmoil, no one now knew who Shakespeare was. They knew the name, but nothing of the author himself. The only clue was found in the first published copy of Shakespeare's works, printed in 1623. Known as the First Folio, it contains a tribute written to Shakespeare by his fellow writer Leonard Digges. Here, Digges refers to Shakespeare's Stratford monument. And in 1662, John Ward, the vicar of Stratford in central England, realises that there is a monument to a William Shakespeare in his church. The Church of Holy Trinity still survives today, as does the monument. It is set in a wall above the grave of a William Shakespeare who died on April the 23rd, 1616, aged 53. Not only does it date from the right time, it actually depicts the familiar image of the balding bearded playwright holding a feather pen and paper, the tools of his trade. So there can be no doubt that this was the William Shakespeare who wrote the plays. Or can there? The Shakespeare Centre in Stratford contains nearly every historical record pertaining to the William Shakespeare who was buried in the town in 1616. But amongst them there are no plays, poems, or even letters written by William Shakespeare. In fact, there is nothing to associate him with literary activities of any kind. They only concern commercial matters. Indeed, amongst all the documentation of the period, there is nothing to suggest that anyone in Stratford during Shakespeare's lifetime considered him to be anything other than a businessman, making his money as a grain merchant. This, together with the evidence showing that he received only the most basic elementary education, has led some scholars to believe that Shakespeare was merely a frontman for works written by someone else, such as Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, or the statesman Sir Francis Bacon. The problem with these theories, however, why choose an apparently poorly educated grain merchant to front such splendid and studious works? Nevertheless, there is a William Shakespeare recorded as working as both an actor and a playwright at the Shoreditch Theatre in London in the 1590s. But such people earned little money, and the records bear this out. The National Archives in the London suburb of Kew contain original documentation concerning this William Shakespeare. Between 1597 and 1600, he was living in the London parish of St Helens, about midway between the Shoreditch and Globe theatres. Here he rented a single room in a squalid and run-down area. On the 15th of November 1597 he is recorded as not having paid his taxes of 5 shillings, around £100 or $130 by today's standards. The following year he still hasn't paid it, nor the year after that, by which time he is officially recorded as a tax evader, owing a total of just over 13 shillings. By the 6th of October 1600 the amount seems to have been seized, and Shakespeare's entire assets are valued at £5, just £2,000 or $2,500 by today's value. In London, William Shakespeare was indeed the epitome of the struggling artist. However, all the records concerning William Shakespeare in Stratford tell a very different story. In 1597, he buys one of the largest houses in the town. Called New Place, it was a home fit for a lord. This is at exactly the same time as he is renting squalid accommodation in London. And in 1598, at the same time as Shakespeare in London is being sought for not paying paltry sums of money, a letter dated the 25th of October concerns Shakespeare in Stratford lending the modern equivalent of £12,000 or $16,000. And in 1602, shortly after Shakespeare's total assets worth just £5 have been seized in London for tax evasion, a surviving document from Stratford shows he purchased 107 acres of land for £320. In today's money, that would be well over $150,000. And how was he making all this money? Writing plays? No. The Stratford records show that he dealt in wheat, malt and barley. As a grain merchant, William Shakespeare seems to have been leading a bizarre double life. In Stratford, a successful and wealthy entrepreneur. In London, an impoverished poet, playwright and actor. But why? It is almost as if we were dealing with two separate men. Indeed, as none of Shakespeare's works survive in his original handwriting, this could just possibly be the answer. But what about the monument that first suggested that the London playwright originally came from Stratford? It clearly depicts the bard we all know and love. For over 300 years, the people of Stratford have gathered annually to celebrate Shakespeare's birthday. A grand parade makes its way through the town to arrive at Holy Trinity Church, where their William Shakespeare is buried. Once inside, they lay wreaths at the foot of his monument. But little do they know that this is not the original. It dates from 1748, well over a century after the death of the person it portrays. It was made in its present form after the monument was damaged. Luckily, in 1656, an historian of church architecture, Sir William Dugdale, made a drawing of the original. Here, from local records, is the restored monument of 1748, while this is Dugdale's picture from his book, Antiquities of Warwickshire, showing the monument in the mid-1600s, well before it was restored. Such tomb memorials showed the deceased's trade, and we can clearly see that the William Shakespeare who was buried here in 1616 is depicted not as a writer, but a dealer in bagged commodities, which is exactly what the Stratford records reveal, a grain merchant. It seems that in the 18th century, the good people of Stratford decided that the tomb memorial of their town's famous son should be shown not only as a writer, but also be reconstructed to more resemble the image of Shakespeare portrayed in the first folio. But if there really were two William Shakespeares, and it's possible William is a common name, and in Elizabethan times so was Shakespeare, how do we account for Leonard Digges's reference to the Stratford monument? Well, there are in fact two Stratfords, one in central England and the other in London. It is now a borough in London's East End, but in Elizabethan times it was a small village less than 5 miles from where Shakespeare the playwright was living. Could this have been where the Stratford monument stood, and where the bard was really born or died? Where the Stratford village church once stood is now the site of the stadium built for the 2012 Olympics. So it is just possible that the bones of history's most famous playwright actually lie beneath this sacred turf.